Hey everybody, Alex Miller at Capnion here. I would like to talk today about some trends in the legal jeopardy that cybersecurity executives can face as a result of things that go bad at their company. And I'm going to talk in particular about a 2016 incident at Uber, the ongoing legal fallout, and specifically about criminal charges that have been recently pressed against its then CISO, Joe Sullivan. As usual, if you've come this far, if you could go ahead and like the video, I would really appreciate it. So, a couple of things that are worth noting here. A, just the practical takeaway of this story is that if you're an organization where a big data breach is something that could happen to you, you want to have a plan in advance about what you're going to do if that data breach were, heaven forbid, to happen. Ideally, it's something that's on a literal piece of paper in your desk, and everybody's got a copy of that same piece of paper. And on that unhappy day, you get that piece of paper out. You're going to be stressed out. Just go ahead and do what's on that piece of paper. I'll try to point out a couple points of why this is important. And of course, literal paper is your computer systems might not be in great shape. Another wrinkle here, a lot of people are attracted to the glamour, and the power, influence, success of C-suite jobs. There was a funny remark by Elon Musk recently about CEO as a made-up title. I mostly agree, with the exception that the O actually has a specific legal meaning, and to be an officer of the company is, at broad strokes, to be the person who is supposed to be legally responsible for what's going on. And if you screw up, you can catch legal liability for what are essentially the company's problems. And that's pretty scary if you're working at a big company. So let me talk about this particular case at Uber. In 2016, Uber had a major breach. They lost 57 million records of personal information, including the personal information of 67,000 drivers. Long story short, they maybe didn't handle it how they were supposed to, and they didn't disclose to everyone that they should have, that this had happened. So there's a variety of laws in different states at the federal level. In Europe, if you're operating internationally, about you have to let various regulators know that this occurred. You have to let victims know that it occurred. And then you have to cooperate appropriately, truthfully answer questions from law enforcement and other similar actors about what happened. And long story short, the allegation is that Uber did not do this. So there was already a civil proceeding against Uber, the company, that in 2018 ended with a $148 million settlement. That was with all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So each of those states, there was some obligation to let people know that this had happened. And Uber, at least to the extent they were willing to settle, maybe didn't do these things. And it's of course worth noting that a settlement is not the same as admission of guilt. So Joe Sullivan was the chief security officer at Uber at the time of that breach. He was charged last summer with concealing a felony and obstruction of justice for failing to live up to his obligations as part of that incident. A couple of awkward facts. He is now the chief security officer at another very cybersecurity adjacent company, Cloudflare, and he's actually once a federal prosecutor at the office that is now charging him. Why am I talking about this now? Just in the past few days, he received a superseding indictment with a charge of wire fraud. I believe the insinuation here being that because of his actions not really correctly disclosing what had happened, Uber was able to raise money from investors in a way it wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and thus he had helped it engage in fraud. So why is it important to have a plan? Travis Kalanick, who's the very famous former CEO and founder of Uber, and Uber's then general counsel are approximately throwing this guy under the bus, or they're not hastening to take responsibility, certainly. There's a lot of he said, she said in court right now about who did what. the former CEO and general counsel are arguing that they did not understand Mr. Sullivan's actions. I intend no judgment here on whether or not this is true, but maybe the point is that it's really valuable to have a plan because you're not going to be having a good time when one of these breaches comes through. And by having a plan, it'll be much easier to, responsibility will be assigned in a way that allows you to do the right thing. And then B, if you really are on the level doing what you're supposed to do, it'll be much easier to demonstrate this in the unhappy event that someone wants to assign you legal liability later. So this is all playing out right now. I don't intend any endorsement about if this person should actually be convicted or not. I will say this is a commonly discussed emerging trend in the cybersecurity world where cybersecurity executives are more often being assigned criminal responsibility for things that happen around data breaches. They're more often being named defendants in big money civil lawsuits. And if this is a position you're in danger of being, you want to be really, really careful. These are really big time legal proceedings. Mr. Sullivan could potentially go to jail for 8 years as a result of these charges, which is a long time, especially for someone who thus far has been very successful in their career. That's a real, it's a real tough change in your life. So I want to go into a couple other intersections. I posted before about ransomware. If you're not aware of ransomware, it's worth learning about. One part of this Uber story is that Uber paid a bounty to these hackers that breached their data. And that payment is now being looked at like a cover-up hush money payment that's part of the story of these civil and criminal proceedings. More and more people are looking at events like this and saying, like, oh, if I pay off a ransomware actor, am I doing the same thing? Am I going to face that kind of liability? And so this is an argument about maybe you don't want to pay the ransomware payment, whatever the other consequences are. It's also cast some doubt around bug bounty programs. Bug bounty is the idea that, hey, if you're looking at our computer system and you see something wrong with our website, why don't, instead of doing a cyber attack, you could just email us that there's this problem here, and then we will pay you, some money. Hey, thanks. There are people, and entirely honest, they're called white hat hackers, make their whole living doing this, kind of finding problems in websites and cell phone apps and similar, and letting people know and collecting these payments. There's a little bit of concern about this now, in that where is the line between you're paying a criminal to hush something up versus you're paying a bounty to somebody before they commit a crime? Certainly, you could talk about one in a disingenuous way that makes it sound like the other. And people are anxious, especially with all this talk of that you could go to jail, about where's that line, and I want to be really sure that I'm on the right side of it. So, long story short, make sure you know what's supposed to happen if you're, heaven forbid, involved in a data breach. Make sure it's on a piece of paper that everybody has, and do it very thoroughly, because you don't want to be in court looking at 8 years in prison.